I want to turn now to go from this story about Microsoft to the train derailment and what we're seeing from some of the politicians here, which is just ridiculous. The political world is mostly to blame for the arrangements of these rail lines. I'm not going to say they're to blame for the derailment, but the entire paradigm of the rail system has been completely screwed up, including in many cases liability protection for some of the companies that operate in certain areas. It's really bad. They're probably not going to have that here. There's probably going to be some massive liability suits here, out of East Palestine, Ohio. But today, Marco Rubio, never one to miss an opportunity to pounce like a vulture. The release of vinyl chloride, his press release says, and other chemicals into the air and ground surrounding East Palestine, Ohio, raises serious environmental concerns and has long-term implications for the town and those living in the region. As investigators look into the cause of the February 3rd, 2023 derailment, additional questions are being raised regarding the U.S. Department of Transportation. Why don't you actually raise questions about the existence of it there, Marco? Regulatory oversight and Norfolk Southern Railway's business practices. So they just didn't oversee it enough? Is that it? Or are you actually going to question the fact that you're taking people's money to put it into this spurious so-called oversight for so-called security, which is not provided, which is constantly a political football? In particular, Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance of Ohio, senator from Ohio, say as they wrote a letter to the DOT Secretary Pete Buttigieg, quote, in particular, we request information from the U.S. Department of Transportation regarding its oversight of the United States freight train system, and more generally, how it balances building a safe, resilient rail industry across our country in relation to building a hyper-efficient one with minimal direct human input. It is not unreasonable to ask whether a crew of 2 rail workers plus 1 trainee is able to effectively monitor 150 cars. How about this, Marco? How about this? Rather than you and people like Pete Buttigieg deciding this, and you have absolutely zero incentive to do a good job financially because you're going to get paid regardless. Why? And of course, the rail lines have been established through political means, as I'm going to discuss in just a moment. Why don't you get out of it and stop pretending that you have all the answers, or at least even some of the answers? Why don't you stop being central command and control people like the old Soviet apparatchiks? Why don't you say the system that is established under this federal takeover of the rail lines is massively corrupt and leads to all sorts of problems? Why don't you go into what I want to discuss right now, everybody? How government regulation impacts the railroad sector. This was a very decent piece from Investopedia, so we'll give it to you. And there's a lot more, too, from Mises Institute, going all the way back. Ayn Rand wrote an entire book about the railroads being destroyed by things like the interstate highway system. But there's more to it than that. You remember last night I mentioned it's gone through phases of favoritism, attacks, favoritism, attacks. So one of the major attacks came with the Sherman antitrust statutes. But prior to that, some of the people who got involved with the rail lines were actually favored. So the rail lines themselves go through certain areas, as I mentioned with the Transcontinental Railroad. The rail lines themselves, sorry, you didn't see me making all my gesticulations. The rail lines themselves, in many cases, were laid down because of government favoritism in the mid-1800s. And as I mentioned before, if you look at the Transcontinental Railroad, which acts in some cases as a feeder line for other rail lines that then moved close to that, you'll see that it was politically driven, unconstitutional, of course, and zigzags all over the place through political areas because congressmen bought a lot of land, or they had friends who bought a lot of land, and so the congressmen steered the Transcontinental Railroad to those areas, and then those people sold the land to the federal government. But let's go with the strictly private world and see how it's gone through these phases of favoritism, disfavor, favoritism, disfavor, and how the whole system has been completely corrupted. Here it is. Investatopia team put this out on October 30th of 2022. Since its beginning in February of 1827, with the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, the U.S. rail industry has had a seemingly symbiotic relationship with the prevailing governments. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, railways were a major contributor to the country's economic growth, both from their own profits and share price appreciation, as well as through the utility they provided other industries and the general public. They radically improved access to raw materials and provided the first reliable cross-country transportation. Much of the history of the United States is deeply intertwined with the history of the railroad sector. I'm not going to go over the takeaways yet. I want to read this. Government regulation that impacted, I hate it when they use it that way, railroads. Two early examples of government regulation that impacted railroads are the Pacific Railroads Acts of 1862 and 1864. These, now I'm trying to remember who was around at that time. Oh, that's right, Abraham Lincoln. These provided financial aid to companies in the form, again, I want to stress this. These provided financial aid from the federal government, because Abraham Lincoln was a big fan of Henry Clay, who was a big fan of Alexander Hamilton, and they all liked to shower pork on their friends. They called them internal improvements back then. It was the American policy that they had of internal improvement, the America First policy that they had. The bonds were valued, these provided 1862 and 1864 Pacific Railroads Act. These provided financial aid to companies in the form of land allowances and mortgage bonds based on the amount of westward track land. So they literally gave them land. The bonds, and they gave them bonds. The bonds were valued at $16,000, $32,000, and $48,000 at the time, with the price increasing for track laid progressively further west. In 2022, these amounts came to these would equal to around $415,000, $830,000, and $1,250,000 respectively when adjusted for inflation. Another example of government regulation impacting the railroad sector was the Department of Transportation Act of 1966, which created the Federal Railroad Administration, the FRA. The newly formed administration was primarily charged with ensuring the safety of both commercial and passenger trains. I see. So they're going to provide the safety, right? Again, just so corrupt. In the early 1900s, blue sky laws were put into effect by individual states to protect investors from fraud by requiring securities issuers and brokerages to register and abide by certain reporting requirements. But guess what? The Uniform Securities Act, first promulgated in 1930 and revised in 1956, provided a model for states wishing to enact laws to prohibit securities fraud on investments that were not regulated at the federal level and do not fall under the jurisdiction of the Securities and Exchange Commission. However, certain securities issuers, including railroads, are exempt from these state laws. Government support of railroads. Amtrak has received subsidies ranging from hundreds of millions to billions of dollars since the early 1970s under the Rail Passenger Service Act. In the 1960s, after the introduction of the FRA, it became evident that passenger railway service was unprofitable. No kidding, it has never been profitable. It didn't become evident, it always was evident. The history of government-run rail always has never, ever seen any government that runs rail in any way, above ground or below ground, ever turn a profit. Ever. However, the utility it provided as a public service was deemed imperative to the well-being of the country by both Congress and President Nixon. And then we've got this. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, one of the things that helped drive the Russians away from buying U.S. long-term bonds and helped spur all these problems that we're seeing with Russia and Ukraine today. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009 allocated $8 billion toward the development of a network of high-speed rail lines connecting major American cities. President Obama was a strong advocate of the initiative and signed it into law. Because the consequences of railway mishaps are substantial, the FRA has a significant budget devoted to safety and operations, approximately $222 million in fiscal year 2019. Railway accidents can be caused by both malfunctioning equipment and human error. The FRA is charged with investigating accidents and implementing measures to ensure steps are taken to prevent avoidable accidents from reoccurring and negatively impacting the railroad sector. America's railways received another boost of $66 billion in federal spending resulting from the 2021 Infrastructure and Jobs Law signed by the Biden administration. This amounts to the largest investment in passenger rail since the creation of Amtrak in 1971, handing the agency billions of dollars to address its repair backlog, modernize its fleet, and reduce trip times. It can also help with rail line expansion into new cities and routes across the U.S. And don't forget, I reported on this for MRC TV. Last year, the Biden administration forced the rail line owners to have to accept parallel users. So, what that meant was, in the past, if the people who owned the rail lines, so the way they do it is they rent out times for the railroad companies to go on their rail lines, right? Sometimes the railroad companies and the rail lines are different things, right? So the rail lines, they can be run by all sorts of people, right? So if they have space, they'll rent out to other rail lines carrying freight, and they'll be able to make up that, make extra money during that time when there's nobody on their rails. The Biden administration started to order them last summer, actually, during the so-called pandemic problem where, they were having supply chain problems. This was going to contribute to it. They were ordering these rail line owners to have to accept below market rate bids to get onto their rail lines when they wouldn't want to accept those rail users. In the meantime, the Biden administration was not allowing certain things to come into the country, like, say, fertilizer, natural gas, and stuff like that, right? So, just unbelievable. So, what does that do? What does that inspire people to do? To get into the rail industry or not get into the rail industry? To invest in them or not? Of course, it's like rent control, which is something that the mayor of Boston wants to reinstitute. Mayor Wu. Are you with me, Mayor Wu? Yeah, rent control. So what does rent control do? It inspires the owners of the property, A, to not take care of the other incidental things, like fixing locks or electricity. They have to pare things down because they're not able to raise the prices based on the way their own prices are going up. And it also makes it less inspiring, less attractive for people who might be interested in creating new housing units on properties to then build new housing units because they're not going to be able to actually charge what they want. Very same thing with the rail lines here. So one of the other things I wanted to mention to you was that during World War I, the railroads were completely taken over by the president at that time, Woodrow Wilson. Completely taken over. After the war, they were handed back with strings attached. Now, as I said, if you have a private paradigm and somebody wants to run a railroad, behind your house, right? Or you've got a piece of property and they want to take a portion of it. But you know that there is a liability there, whether it's sparks that fly off, and this often happens. Rail sparks can cause all sorts of problems, especially in dry areas where there are fields nearby. The grasses can get those sparks and fires can start, wildfires can start. So there is an insurance incentive for the railroad owners and the train operators to cover themselves and make sure that they're not that risky. And the insurance companies have an incentive to make sure that those people operating those lines don't engage in risky behavior. And if they do engage in risky behavior, their rates will become so high it will be cost prohibitive for them to stay in the market. So the insurance incentive weeds out the bad operators. Then you've got common law torts. If you didn't have the government getting involved, handing things out, taking things through eminent domain, setting things up early on to help the rail line operators get their land, you wouldn't see so many rail lines going through these areas. Now, you can't say, well, hey, towns, they congregate. Trees, houses, builders will congregate near the rail lines. Yes, maybe some will. But that would be voluntary for these people to do so. And again, if you've got a railroad company that is allowing highly dangerous and possibly not just in a certain zone, but also over large areas where the wind can take it, you've got a really high liability payoff there for insurance. So you're going to see people being very, very safety conscious. And when the government gets involved through the FRA in checking safety, that retards that natural insurance process that sees real costs for real dangers as assessed by the insurance companies. So imagine if the government got involved with checking out safety and providing payoffs to people if there were problems, right? Or if you had a mall and the government said, hey, tell you what, we'll help you build your roads and we'll take care of all the safety for you. Would you get the same level of insurance? Would you be as perspicacious about your liability if you've got the government handling it? Of course not. You wouldn't do that, especially if you can start greasing the gears and getting the government to continue doing more for you. So these are all intimately tied together. And I thought it was important to bring this up because you're not going to hear this from Marco Rubio. You're not going to hear this from the U.S. Senate. You're going to hear people blaming Pete Buttigieg, blaming Joe Biden, blaming the rapacious capitalists when this is not capitalism. This is crony capitalism, and or it is government taking advantage and sucking the life out of an industry. So while the rail industry has been harmed by things like the federal government creating the interstate highway system, while local roads like Route 66, which was local but went across so many states, local people have had their livelihoods destroyed by the interstate highway system, which Pete Buttigieg, of course, will argue that it was all done for racist purposes. Sure. The effects might have harmed people in cities where certain minorities live, but I don't think it was done for racist purposes. The effects also might have seen certain special people connected to the government getting favors as the interstate highway system went close to them, but I don't think it was done for racial purposes. It was systemic racism. It was glad handling. And whatever the skin color was at the time, I don't think it would have mattered, right? If it was majority in the House of Representatives and the Congress and everything were brown skin, red skin, yellow skin, white skin, whatever, it would have borne out with the friends who were closely tied to those Congress people getting the benefits of the highway system being put in near their lands. Just like when you see rail projects, it's the same sort of thing. When you see in New Hampshire, they've been lobbying for a long time to have a rail system come from Massachusetts up into the town called Nashua. Um, it would, as I noted, it would never turn a profit. It would only benefit the people who have land near the rail system for their businesses. And it would be a passenger rail system. So, of course, anytime you have one of those little rail stops where people can get on and off, that's where the landowners would win. So, what do you want? You're going to have more stops. They want more stops. Frederick Bastiat wrote about this, the train to nowhere. When you got a government-run rail system and that they're building, you're going to see every politician from certain areas wants it to stop here, here, here. Eventually, it's just going to keep stopping all over the place, right? They can't service everybody, but the people who want the gravy, they're going to lobby really hard to get it to stop near them. That's, I think, a pretty big deal. So I wanted to give you that information about the rail systems. And again, if we look at systemically, if we look at not systemic racism, but systemic fascism, the United States government imposing the Sherman Antitrust Act, patently unconstitutional. And that has been levered in many ways to play favorites with certain people and harm others. In a couple days, maybe tomorrow night, I'll read to you a segment from a really, really good book, which is called The Myth of the Robber Barons by Burton Folsom. And the kids love that book. I love that book. Burton Folsom's a terrific writer. And he goes through some of these people like Rockefeller, like others, who developed things early on, and they actually did benefit people, you know. And then, of course, with the Rockefellers and others, they damage people as well. Now, I want to turn to you, if we have the opportunity, to read to you something from our Fight for 15. A little bit from Yuri Maltsev, who, as I mentioned, he was one of the final defectors from the Soviet Union. And this is from a book that came out a couple of years ago, actually. Donald Livingston is the editor, and it's called Rethinking the American Union for the 21st Century. Release was 2012. Well, they were ahead of the game, huh? So it's got great stuff by Thomas DiLorenzo. I want to read you one from that, too, if you'd like that. And so here it is. This is Yuri Maltsev, came over from the Soviet Union and had a lot of connections to the USSR and left. He was one of the final defectors before the USSR finally broke down and split apart between 1989 and 1991. So he has a quote from F.A. Hayek here. He says, the dispute between the market... Oh, this is called Too Big to Fail, Lessons from the Demise of the Soviet Union. And he has a quote from F.A. Hayek. The dispute between the market order and socialism is no less than a matter of survival. To follow socialist morality would destroy much of present humankind and impoverish much of the rest. Then Maltsev writes, the fall of the Berlin Wall, followed in 1991 by the collapse of Europe's last major empire, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, challenged the course of world history to an extent not yet fully understood today. That collapse exposed the total bankruptcy of big governments based on central planning and an overregulated command economy. The USSR was too big not to fail. It should teach us the lesson that any centralized tyranny, whether it emanates from Moscow or Washington, D.C., leads to corruption, violations of property and other human rights, misery, murder, and eventually dismal failure. Hence, it provides a better perspective on our own situation, on the dangers of our own big and out-of-control government pursuing socialist schemes. Let us look at a little history. So, of course, he's talking about the United States there. Political economy of the USSR. Kremlin leaders realized from the first that the only way of managing an economy under socialism was not with worker self-management and the like, but with direct government coercion based on mass murder and forced labor. The absolute command economy and the monstrous killer state were created. Management of production and distribution was performed by the central government, Pete Buttigieg. enforced by mass deportations and the slaughter of bourgeois intellectuals and the natural elite. By secret decrees of Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin, clergy, so-called capitalists, whatever that meant, military and police officers, as well as most politicians, including even those who supported socialism and the Soviets, were designated either for an immediate slaughter or slow death in the dreadful concentration camps of the Gulag. By the way, if you want a really good sample of what happened to people when they were put in the Gulag, read The Long Walk. It's unbelievable. I'll read you a segment of that. Just the description of being on those cattle cars going through Siberia, it'll blow you away. I put part of that in my Marxism production for the MRC TV about a year and a half ago. I did an 11-part series on Marxism. So, the ultimate human toll of Soviet socialism is estimated at over 60 million who perished in the Gulag system during Stalin's collectivizations, purges, campaigns against unearned incomes, Liz Warren, and other devilish experiments. The system that replaced the market was that of central planning, with rationing of means of production as well as of housing, education, healthcare, and consumer goods, and the creation of non-economic institutions of compulsion to work based on slave labor in gulags, collective farms, and industry. Western historians focus on the terror against intellectuals and political opponents, but over half of all executions took place in the countryside. The liquidation of the kulaks, relatively wealthy peasants, ended up in 10 million of them deported to Siberia with their families, where most died of starvation and hypothermia. In Ukraine, Stalin starved to death over 7 million peasants, and similar famines with catastrophic results were organized in the Volga region and South Russia. Local bureaucrats also deported orphans, the elderly, and the handicapped to their deaths in the Gulag system. Russian socialists were the first to abolish property rights, which were declared a sanctification of capitalist oppression and exploitation. Gee, some similar things being said in the United States over the past 50 years. They pursued the expropriation of private property with fanatical zeal and unprecedented brutality. Like other versions of socialism, Italian fascism, and German National Socialism, Soviet communism provides credible evidence that the abolition of private property leads to the extinction of other personal rights and freedoms, as well as the creation of monstrous, centralized tyrannies and killer states. It is still common in academia to identify the socialists as the left and the Nazis as the extreme right, as if they stood on opposite ends of the ideological spectrum. But in fact, under both fascist and socialist regimes, government bureaucracy completely controls the production. It decides what shall be produced, how much, for whom, when, and how. The difference between the systems is that the German and Italian patterns did indeed allow, or more accurately, tolerated private property. However, it was property in a restricted sense, not the unrestricted private ownership of Roman law and 19th century Europe, but rather conditional possession, under which the state, the owner of last resort, reserved to itself the right to interfere with and confiscate assets, and that in its judgment were unsatisfactorily used. Now, just to let you know, again, if you look at John Locke's second treatise of government, he has that in there. In his supposed defense of natural rights to private property, he stipulates to people, well, you can't let your property go to waste. Then it has to be divvied up to other people. Who defines waste, John? It's not a natural rights document. I have to insist on that. People have to recognize that, because that's one of the nuggets, one of the sources of the poison that entered into the United States. The belief that the social contract that he supposedly describes is at all real, and that private property can be protected by forcing you to give up your private property. Insane. For police protection, of course. Wink, wink, protection. He says here, the governments of fascist Italy and Nazi Germany directed production decisions, curbed entrepreneurship and the labor market, and determined wages and interest rates by centralized authority similar to that of the socialist states. The United States is very close today to this model. This is in 2012. As indeed are most centralized Western welfare states, with confiscatory taxation, nationalization of major industries in the financial sector, affirmative action policies, environmental regulations, and other policies undermining property rights, including minimum wage and licensing. With the end of private property, the price system necessary for an efficient economy ceased to exist in the Soviet official economy, although in hiding there was a fiercely prosecuted black market. Efficient allocation of resources became not even theoretically possible. Karl Marx's goal of the social regulation of production upon a definite plan was finally achieved, but it led to a colossal waste of resources, shortages of almost everything, and the greatest loss of human life in history. This system survived relatively intact until the economic reforms of the 1960s associated with Nikita Khrushchev's campaign of de-Stalinization. Economic discussion encouraged by this campaign led to proposals by such reform-minded economists as A.M. Berman, E.G. Lieberman, and L.V. Kantorovich, who persuaded the Communist Party leadership to understand the necessity of reforming the Soviet economic order on principles of decentralization, shifting responsibilities from federal authority to localities. Younger participants in this conversation, L.A. Abalkin, A.G. Abangagyan, N.I. Petrikov, B. Radisky, and others, 20 years later, would become close confidants to Mikhail Gorbachev and the economic architects of perestroika. Instead of the complete overhaul of socialist slavery, they proposed a series of measures to introduce an oxymoronic market system, or market socialism, wink, wink, including profit reorientation of the incentive system to indicators measuring sales, abandonment of centralized direct funding of enterprises, and the introduction of self-governance and self-financing. But even so, in an economy under total government monopoly with no private property, there could be no means of rational economic calculation. Providing opportunities for secession of republics or a market price system were not even mentioned in these discussions. These piecemeal measures exposed the futility of reforming socialism. The absurdity of a third way between slavery and freedom that still occupies many minds in Western academia was evident. They made clear the analysis of Ludwig von Mises, who wrote In Human Action, his book, 800 pages of brilliance. Quote, private ownership of the means of production, market economy, or capitalism as it's known, and public ownership of the means of production, socialism, or communism, or planning, can be neatly distinguished. Each of these distinguished, not extinguished, each of these systems of society's economic organization is open to a precise and unambiguous description and definition. They can never be confounded with one another. They cannot be mixed or combined. No gradual transition leads from one to the other. They are mutually incompatible. End quote. By creating a system that redistributed resources between the small number of firms that were profitable, whatever this means under central planning, because you can't really tell, and the vast majority that were unprofitable, the Soviet Party and government apparatchiks suppressed any attempt by the enterprise managers to become less dependent on the state planning mechanism. The system punished efficient enterprises and supported the losers. However, it was the masses, not the bureaucrats, who bore the brunt of the resulting state waste, as the bureaucrats set the price of labor in the USSR at a bare subsistence level. The absurdity of the system was clearest with the introduction of the concept of profit. Profit under these so-called reforms became a planned category, calculated as a normative percentage of the costs. These high cost, high profit approaches were the catalyst for the total collapse of the system during Gorbachev's perestroika. For a while, huge losses in the system were covered by foreign currency obtained from the sales of oil, gas, and other natural resources and credits readily provided by Western governments and banks. Since the mid-1970s, over $300 billion was spent in this way. The Kremlin bureaucrats, who had to purchase grain in the world market in order to make up for domestic production failures, used these hard currency reserves to feed the population. Russia and Ukraine, breadbaskets of Europe before the First World War, became the world's largest importers of grain. By the mid-1980s, the deterioration of the Soviet economy reached a critical point. More than half the state business enterprises were failing and survived only because of huge government bailouts and handouts. The agricultural sector, with a collective farm system based on state ownership of land and forced labor, required an infusion of more than 100 billion rubles a year to support. I will stop there. The rail system that the United States has echoes so much of what the Soviet Union ended up doing. Redirecting resources, pushing things all over the place. Just unbelievable. So, want to go into the Rockfin chat now. I'll leave my glasses on for a second. I wonder if those things are even. I had to fix them a little while ago. Do it like that. Yeah. All right. So let's check out Rockfin chat, everybody. Sorry, I've been neglecting it a little bit. Oh, $10 donation. Thank you very much. That like springs up first, so I just saw that. So I want to thank the person donated. Thank you very much. Anne. Oh, Anne, thank you so much. Thank you, Anne. Anne Christ. Are you, what's that, those restaurants, Ruth Chris? Those are great. Those are really good restaurants. The Ruth Chris Steakhouse places. And Anarchy Andrew. Thank you so much, Andrew. Boy, you guys, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. That is a big deal. Thanks. And, yeah, and Andrew says, hey, hi, Guard. I sent you an invite to a Star Trek party at your Liberty Conspiracy email address. Hope you got it. Oh, I have to check that out more often. Twitter won't let me sign up. Oh, they won't let you sign up, dude. That stinks. I'll check out the Liberty Conspiracy. And folks, if you want to email me on the Liberty Conspiracy side, it's libertyconspiracy@yahoo.com. libertyconspiracy@yahoo.com. So yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's really, really cool. I wouldn't mind checking that out. Guard, Jason says, when we were talking about the LGBTQ stuff early at the beginning of the show. Guard, says Jason, speaking of celebs that push the LGBTQ plus community, many of them are not in that crowd, but are subjecting their kids to it in order to be included. Oh, yeah, isn't that crazy? It's disgusting, the gaslighting of each other we are witnessing. Oh, so true. And it's this weird... I'm sure you guys, you saw aspects of this. We all experience aspects of the go along to get along crowd in high school or college or whatever, where people would just act strangely or they wear certain clothes to try to fit in and everything. This is just a manifestation of it. It's this stunted growth, it's this extended adolescence, and they virtue signal in so many ways. And it's just weird. I was thinking about the difference between growing up around, a farm and, cutting wood or, that sort of thing, and being so immersed in media that, the different vibes in media start to play an effect in your own household. How weird is that, really, right? It's very strange. Jason says, where is CPS when a celeb forces their little boy to wear a dress so they can be included in the new thing? perfectly stated. Oh, that's right. CPS is only involved if it's a traditional family trying to keep their kids from being jabbed and brainwashed. I dated a young woman who was homeschooled, and the cops came to her place and gave the CPS gave them a big, big hassle. Let's see. Rhonda's there and Chris is there. Oh man, Jason, you got me hungry talking about what you got for dinner there, man. And Jason writes, best part of Hitchhiker's Guide was when they went to warp speed and the other paperwork guys had to do the paperwork in order to follow, or when they went on break instead of pursuing. It's like tea time in England. Just stop everything and observe the ritual. Yeah, and they did a good job with that movie too. I thought that movie was pretty good. That was a lot of fun. There are a couple differences, of course, like the things that flip up anytime Ford or Zaphod or Arthur had an idea, the things that punish them for actually having independent thought. That was done by the final scriptwriter. But Douglas Adams worked so hard to try to get that movie made. He was in LA for a long, long time, and he was getting really down. And then he saw a psychiatrist or a therapist, and the therapist said, you know, I think one of the things that would really help you out is if you worked out, go to a gym, start exercising. Because Douglas Adams was a big dude. He had been a bouncer and stuff like that. So he did, and he started feeling better, and it turned out that's where he died. He had just finished a workout, and he had a heart attack. I mean, you know, this sort of strange, dark comic irony, I suppose. I don't know if he would look at it that way, or if his family would. But one of the interesting things there, I'll just let you know, is he became very good friends with Mike Nesmith. And Mike Nesmith started his television and film production company, Pacific Arts Media, thanks to inheriting a certain amount of money because his mother had invented whiteout, and she sold it to 3M for a lot of money. And then Mike had a real good mind for finances and business and great instincts for media. And so he started Pacific Arts, and he loved Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And so what ended up happening was Mike really got Pacific Arts off the ground because he discovered that PBS had tons of documentaries and they weren't protecting their copyright, so-called copyright on them, and they had used tax money on them. And he's like, I'm going to acquire these and start putting these out on VHS, because VHS was just starting on videotape. And he had a whole library of these things. Then PBS sued him years later. And by that time, he had acquired the rights to try to turn Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy into a movie. And it's a very interesting story. My friend Eric has great knowledge about this. He knew that PBS had unlimited resources because they could get tax money, and they were going to try to bankrupt them. So what he did was he went back to Douglas Adams and he said, I'm going to sell you back the rights to your story, because I do not want public television to get the rights to this. I don't want them to own your creation. I want to give it back to you, Douglas. So they became great friends, really good friends. And it ended up that on the 1996 tour of the Monkees, I believe, when Mike joined them for a little while, they did some British tours. And on almost all the British tour dates, Douglas Adams joined them on stage playing rhythm guitar. He was part of the band. So they're playing Circle Sky and Porpoise Song and all this stuff. Douglas Adams playing guitar. I mean, how much fun is that, right? And if you take a listen to the Porpoise Song, which is the theme for the Monkees movie Head, where they just said, forget it, we're done. We're done with all the criticism. We're done with all this stuff. People calling us fake and prefab and all these things, and the networks giving us hassles. The record companies, we're done. Bob Rafelson, Jack Nicholson, the Monkees, they worked on the story idea together. They shot it. Frank Zappa's in it. Terry Garr is in it. All sorts of people. And it's a genius movie. And the theme of it is called The Porpoise Song. It was written by Carole King. And it's basically about how the court jester Porpoise, the dancing porpoise, is leaving. He's done doing tricks for you. The porpoise is laughing, goodbye, goodbye. Now, that movie was done in the early 70s. Douglas Adams later incorporated a very similar idea, the dolphins actually being the second most intelligent race on Earth, and they leaving Earth with their own goodbye, goodbye sort of thing. It's very interesting. Douglas Adams really liked the Monkees, clearly. and their anarchic sort of Monty Python, pre-Monty Python attitudes and stuff, which of course was sort of taken from the Marx Brothers in a way, but expanded upon, I think. So very interesting stuff. And what ended up happening was Mike Nesmith sold the rights back to Douglas Adams for $1. And Douglas Adams never forgot that. So what you see in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy movie is a result, in a way, of that wonderful relationship that sparked up between Mike Nesmith and Douglas Adams, and how Mike Nesmith was able to confound PBS so they could not get the rights to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Awesome. I don't really know what happened with Pacific Arts. I think they were able to settle outside, and I don't know if PBS got the rights back to a lot of their documentaries or whatever, but they didn't get Hitchhiker's Guide. Awesome. And by the way, if you ever get a chance, the best version of Hitchhiker's Guide, other than the first novel, is the radio series. And the novel is actually based on the scripts that he wrote for the radio series. And he wrote some of the second series while he was script editor for Doctor Who, and did stories like The City of Death, based in Paris. And he was at BBC going from one place to another, running back and forth. He would write script ideas on bathroom paper, and like hand paper, and then bring it into the guys in the radio studio so they could read the lines, and then he'd go back and do stuff. And if you see in The City of Death, you'll also see John Cleese makes an appearance, and he's in his Fawlty Towers outfit, because John Cleese and Douglas Adams had gone to school together. They were friends. Douglas worked on some of the Monty Python stuff, and Douglas knew that they were shooting Fawlty Towers in one of the studios at BBC in BBC Centre in London. And so during a break, he went, "Hey, I'm doing this story in the Louvre with the TARDIS and Doctor Who. Would you like to come and make a cameo?" And John Cleese said, "Sure." So you'll see at a certain moment, John Cleese is standing there like this art snob in the so-called Louvre, and near the Mona Lisa, the TARDIS has appeared out of nowhere, and it looks like it's a piece of art on display. And so John Cleese is there with some woman. I guess she was a popular woman at the time. This woman was very flamboyant. I don't know who the actress was, but he's there and he says, yes, but the juxtaposition, the fact that it doesn't belong here and yet it is here, is the art. And she says, and then the Doctor and Romana go flying past, and they go inside, and the TARDIS disappears. And John Cleese and the woman go, yes, brilliant. It's just awesome. Totally ad-libbed. This is just great. So anyway, that's my little story about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and Douglas Adams and Mike Nesmith of the Monkees. Mike, very cool. Rest in peace, Mike. Sorry to see him go. And yeah, he was a really good guy. And by the way, the second to last time I saw the Monkees, I got to go before the show, and he and Mickey went through a bunch of stuff. It was just he and Mickey because Peter and Davey had passed away. And they were great with the crowd and everything. It was down in Massachusetts. And there were, I don't know, about 20 of us there watching. We had paid a little extra so we'd go hang out before the show. And it was really fun. It was really nice. Mickey was cool. Mike was cool. And as we left, they said, "Okay, see you later. We're going to grab some dinner." And I went to go get some dinner. So I'm walking up this side aisle. Mike yells out and he goes, "Hey, thanks for coming." And he's up on the stage. And I said, "Thank you for Repo Man." And he just burst out laughing, slapped his knees. He's like, "Oh, oh, oh, oh." And he goes, "Remember, kid, nobody ever gets killed over an effing car." That's a line from Repo Man. Nobody gets killed over an effing car. And I was like, life of a Repo Man is always intense, Mike. And you could tell he was like, and I heard from a friend that he loved it when people acknowledged the fact that his company, Pacific Arts, was the production company that actually allowed Repo Man to get made. And it is a genius movie, as you know, if you've seen it. It is, as I said, it's the only Generation X film that ever matters is Repo Man. That's it. You don't need any other films. And I'm serious about that. That's the definitive statement on films for so-called Gen Xers. All right, thanks everybody. I better get going. Wow, I went late again, but I hope you don't mind. It's really fun. I want to get some final chats Get some final chats from you all. PE. Yeah, we got the Public Enemy in the house, Tom. Flava. I remember it was funny when I did my journalism internship in Washington, D.C., I was really into Public Enemy. And I was living right near, I was on 4th Street Southeast. And so I was really close to Anacostia. And so we were, where I was doing my internship, we were at this intersection, and you would hear PE on car stereos all the time, just the bass. You know, she watched Channel Zero, and they ramped up the beats per minute on that one. It was just max, awesome. JB says, let me see. Oh, replying to something Anarchy Andrew said, and I hope you guys don't mind me reading this and just look it over. Oh, yeah, I despise social media and don't use computers much anymore. I am from the COM64 days playing around. I love the early days of the net, but it has gone to the dogs. They can have the net. I just use it for things like this. Well, that's awesome. Super cool. Tom Cooper says, God bless you and your family, guard. Have a good night. Thank you, man. You guys make me feel good. I'm still sort of, I still have a little bit of that headache. So, I was wondering how I was going to do this when I started the show. I was like, well, what will I tell the audience? And I sort of said, well, I guess I'll just present it as this is an experiment. This is a way that you can see somebody who's always, been fairly intense about freedom, pushing freedom beyond the hurdles that might be in his way right now. And you'll see, maybe there'll be one day when my eyes half closed and I don't know if I'm doing a good job, and you can let me know if I did a decent job, if I got the word out, if I put out information. And I want to expand on that so that especially on Substack, you can get links. When I can get things rolling over at Odysee, you can get links there. And I was telling Jason a little bit earlier today when we were on the phone that I want to start taking some of these separate topics that I might read the history of X, Y, or Z, like the FAA, the FCC, that sort of thing, and put them in their own videos. Again, I've done it once on this Trudeau thing, but I want to do it more, almost done in a sort of live version of what James Corbett has done so well with his awesome and very well researched reports. So I just wanted to mention that to you. And as I get more time, I'll start doing special reports as well. And we will do some really good fiction. I can't wait for that, too. This roundtable fiction with multiple people reading. So with that, I will say thank you so much, everybody. Blessings to you all. Thanks for making a headache day a pretty decent day. And I'm telling you, it's funky. It's funky dunky. So, yeah, with that, I'll say fare thee well, and I'll leave you with this. And as the prisoner says, be seeing you. Let's turn now to the train story. And I want to sort of expand on what we discussed earlier. And I'm going to play an extended portion of this video from the Mises Institute. And it is Ryan McMaken. Remember, I was reading Ryan McMaken's book the other day, reading portions of it, along with Tho Bishop. And they're talking about whether or not more government is the answer to train derailments like the one in West Palestine, Ohio, or if is it East? Sorry if I'm getting it wrong. Or if it's government that actually has warped things in ways that people haven't even really calculated and has caused so many problems. So let's go with Mises Media. I'll stop it on occasion, but I want to lay this out for you, all right?
Welcome back to Radio Rothbard. This is Tho Bishop, joined, as always, by our chief editor, Ryan McMaken. And we are talking today about the failures of capitalism once again, or at least that was what came up on the Mises Institute Instagram page over the past week. A few people pointing to the really horrific images from Ohio of the train derailment, which brought hundreds of thousands of pounds of extremely toxic chemicals. They end up, as part of that derailment, the officials there did a controlled burn, which, from what I understand, was perfectly within the protocol there, to help prevent greater risks in terms of water tables and things like that. And sure enough,
And I have to mention here, when he says perfectly within the protocol, I'm not assuming that he agrees that the protocol is a good protocol. He's just sort of laying out what the normative assumptions are here, and then they're going to start knocking down some of these shibboleths.
Again, you have very confident Instagram socialists pointing to this and saying, well, see, golly gosh darn, this is exactly why we need more government. Once again, we're seeing the consequences of capitalism run amok. These private trains and these private chemical companies have free carte blanche to do whatever they want. And because of that, because of our unregulated, high capitalist economy, the people of Ohio and their around it are suffering from the fallout of this very devastating pollution event. And so obviously within something this complicated, there are a number of different issues there, and there are still details coming in and out. The lack of news coverage about this early on is itself an interesting component here. But Ryan, as someone who has written on the topic of the libertarian view of pollution, is that what we truly believe? Is allowing hundreds of thousands of chemicals to be thrown around and burned by, as long as a big company, big corporation, as long as it's privatized? Is that really the libertarian Rothbardian approach to an issue of this magnitude?
Well, obviously not, right? Or we wouldn't be bringing it up.
I want to keep that in the closet somewhere.
Yeah, we'd be avoiding the topic. But of course, that's not the reality of free market thinking, laissez-faire thinking, liberal thinking in the true sense. Of course, free market people think that people who commit harm against other people should be punished and restrained from continuing to do that activity. And this has been the case for a long, long time. It's just the solution offered is different, of course, than what the pro-interventionist regulatory people think. And what an interesting dynamic has come out of this is that when you start to dive down and really look at what is the suggested solution, it turns out that the free market people, at least of the Rothbardian variety, are far less tolerant of pollution and putting poison in the soil and in the water than are the mainstream regulation types, because they all look at not at what actual harms were suffered by any particular people, but at what is a socially optimal or what is an efficient level of pollution.
Now, just going to pause there, everybody, because as you guys probably have, you've had conversations like this or thought about these sorts of things too. I don't want to be too assumptive, but I know, you guys, I'm always, getting feedback from you guys talking about stuff in free markets. You understand all these things really well. But what's interesting on this that I note is that as Ryan McMakin discusses how there could be a much stricter paradigm and so on, but instead they go by these government determined levels of what is acceptable or not acceptable. That's one of the reasons why I stress that when it comes to things like efficiency and sustainability and satisfaction and goodness, those are all subjective things, and they all have to be determined by people within the market. They have to be determined by us. So these safety margins that the government creates, just like I read from this book a little while ago, last night when I was reading Yuri Maltsev's piece about Russia, the Soviet Union, they would establish so-called rules but the rules had nothing to do with what people actually wanted on the ground. And the only way that that information can be expressed is if you get government out of it, because not only does the presence of government making the rules have no real tie to actually anything measurable from people, and they're very arbitrary, but they create secondary and tertiary and all sorts of unintended consequences. And so we're going to start exploring those things. But I wanted to get into that just to mention, these things have to be evaluated by the people on the ground through their interpersonal relationships and respect for private property, and then expressed out of that through the marketplace of buying and selling and insurance. If people want to get involved, they'll probably have to get insurance. All those need price mechanisms. They need price points. And people have to be able to go by other people's experiences and learn from these things. When you get government doing it arbitrarily, it completely removes all of that from the equation.
And interestingly, this contrast was outlined in some detail back in 2016, and I think that was the last time we really treated this topic with at any extensive level at Mises.org. But it was Tyler Cowen, who I do not consider to be libertarian or anything like that, but has a decent understanding of how it works. And he noted that Paul Krugman was freaking out about something at the time, it doesn't even matter, about inflation or about pollution, and saying, well, if these free market people had their way, there would just be pollution everywhere all the time, because as long as big business does it, they can poison as many people as they want. And Cowen pointed out that contrary to what Krugman seemed to be thinking, if you took the Rothbardian position on this, it would be far more costly to big business and to polluters than would the sort of regulatory state that Krugman supports. And I'll just quote what Cowen says here back in 2016. He says, Krugman's position is the opposite of the correct criticism. And so Cowen's setting up a criticism of the Rothbardian people anyway, but it's a different one from Krugman's. The main problem with classical libertarianism is that it doesn't allow enough pollution. Under libertarian theory, pollution is a form of violent aggression that should be banned, as Murray Rothbard insisted numerous times. Okay, but what about actual practice once all those special interest groups start having their say? That is, the people who want to punish the polluters. Historically, under the more limited government of the 19th century, it was big business that wanted to move away from the unpredictable local and litigation-driven methods of control, that is, actual tort cases in the court system, and toward a more, this is what big business wanted, they wanted to move toward a more systematic regulatory approach at the national level. So what this means is that business has wanted the regulation. They've wanted sort of this managed level of pollution because it set into place a tolerable, legally tolerable amount of pollution that you could actually pump into the environment and then be covered and not have to worry about some guy downstream who you might have poisoned his farm or his fish hatchery, who knows what. And then it's up to the courts to determine in that specific case how much harm needs to be paid out and so on. Instead, what they wanted was a regulatory state that said, oh, well, we have determined this is the acceptable amount of pollution. As long as you stay below this, then you're more or less covered legally, unless we can prove negligence or some other issue like that. So it actually, by adopting the regulatory approach, rather than the Rothbardian approach, you're setting up a system where punishments can actually potentially be much, much higher against polluters, and it's limited by state regulation instead. And we're told by Cowen that that's actually the correct approach, that he doesn't like Rothbardianism either because it's too stringent. He thinks that the government should determine what the socially optimal level then and quote unquote efficient level of pollution then is. Because if you just let everybody sue people who poison the water, well, those big businesses would just completely go out of business, and we can't have that. So there's this belief that government needs to artificially create these legal environments where people can actually poison you, but that we've determined as a society we should tolerate that poisoning because it's good for everybody. So you can see the competing views there, whereas, of course, I happen to agree with the Rothbardian view. Look, if you poison people, you should look out for that, and you should be held accountable. And you might have to endure big payouts, but that's what insurance companies are for. And if you can't be trusted to take proactive steps to avoid poisoning people, well, then you can't get insurance, and that's your problem. That's not "quote unquote" society's problem.
Right. And I want to I want to go back a little bit to what Ryan mentioned there, when he talked about, and I know Tyler Cowen, and I don't know Ryan personally. We have mutual acquaintances. But I do want to mention one of the key things. Hopefully, if you get to see this episode or see the isolated piece that I did on so-called monopolies, it's the first part of something I want to continue discussing with people. In particular, doing some Liberty Conspiracy videos that will be the intellectual ammunition that people can hold on to for a long period of time. But remember when we talked about that PBS YouTube series that they put out there called was it, Flash something economics, right? And it had this professor who was trying to tell people that, well, a so-called natural monopoly, as the label that they give it, is one that is created by the government, because the government and the politicians have determined that allowing more than one provider to bring in electricity or water or anything like that would not be, as they say, efficient. And remember, when I was discussing this, that I mentioned that efficiency can only be determined and calculated by the individual, because the individual's values are all different from everybody else's. And the way that the individual's valuations regarding efficiency and other types of qualitative and quantitative items, the way they have a bearing on him, is through expression, through the price mechanism, through actually spending, willingly giving up his money to get an exchange of that good or service with what he is giving the other person or the other business. So that expresses information of value, and that shows that someone thinks something is efficient. And so when McMakin mentions how they have determined what is the Tyler Collins says there should be some arbitrary, some government determination of what is efficient, that's an oxymoron. Government cannot determine what is efficient. And that's why I was reading the other night. I wanted to pick up the Yuri Maltsev thing the night before, but I got to read some of that last night, talking about the Soviet idea of what is efficient and how disastrous that is, because this has a direct bearing on the way that the rail systems and the way the rail safety systems have operated. They don't really operate based on what people think is a safety parameter paradigm. So just went back just a little bit to show you again what Ryan had to say. And Tyler Cowen is an economist and teaches economics, but he is definitely not a free market economist. He's close, but he makes errors like that, especially when it comes to subjective utility and the expression of values and definitions and basic definitions of things like efficiency. You can't just have a government saying this is efficient. It doesn't work that way.
I believe that government needs to artificially create these legal environments where people can actually poison you, but that we've determined as a society we should tolerate that poisoning because it's good for everybody. So you can see the competing views there, whereas, of course, I happen to agree with the Rothbardian view. Look, if you poison people, you should look out for that, and you should be held accountable. And you might have to endure big payouts, but that's what insurance companies are for. And if you can't be trusted to take proactive steps to avoid poisoning people, well, then you can't get insurance, and that's your problem. That's not "quote unquote" society's problem. So
the other thing I want to mention about this, everybody, is that there's a philosophical and moral differential here as well, a very strong contrast. The contrast is, in common law, personal integrity and morality. Personal integrity and morality tied to private property and ownership of oneself and a recognition and respect of that from your neighbors. The idea that is being pushed, Tyler Cowen is pushing the idea of consequentialism, of the idea of the greatest good for the greatest number. So the government will determine what reaches the threshold of risk. and they will set those parameters. And those parameters will not be addressed through personal interaction, through common law, through people actually saying, well, this is how my life was affected. I'm in front of other people here. They're local. This is what they determine I'm owed by your damages here. It will be set by other people from far away, even before any damages occur. So this is a major philosophical difference, the difference between individual rights, individual private property, and the government assuming for people what their efficiency scales are and what the damages could possibly be, and then weighing those, saying, well, we're weighing in the balance, determining what is really best, because we'd like to have these businesses not actually have to pay as much for their own security and safety.
So just in those, that's because it's kind of this basic outline there, that this critique of libertarianism as just being fine with pollution is actually it's the opposite. That is true. And the concern over decades has been how to create a way to allow for more pollution while still, quote unquote, holding companies accountable somehow. And so you can take your pick there. You can debate which one you want. The Rothbardian one, however, I think objectively is the more stringent standard.
And of course, even with a situation like this, when we're dealing with chemical fallout that is not kind of the byproduct of, normal output from a factory, right, or something like that. It's not. The nuclear power plant has made some backroom deal with the shady politician to authorize, cartoonish nuclear waste, it's bright green, being pumped in and killing all the fishes, as part of just the normal standard operating procedure. We're dealing with an emergency event, a catastrophe, in the sense of a train derailment. But even there is this dynamic to which, there is a level of government. For one, as someone who lives down here in the Gulf of Mexico, that once upon a time was picking up tar balls after the BP oil spill, explosion down here back in 2010 or whenever that was. I have a pretty good feeling that the result of all of this is going to be the train company involved, Norfolk Southern, right? They're going to they benefit from government protections in terms of the liability that they will face in terms of damages, both in terms of the immediate impact and the long-standing consequences. I know there's tremendous fears right now about long-term health consequences to those affected, both in the immediate vicinity, both in terms of long-term exposure and water and things like that. The concerns about future, cancer clusters and byproducts there. Again, the government system that we have right now is built towards with the benefit to these large corporations in mind, in terms of the actual liability, the exposure that they will have to this, rather than what we would have in a more private, Rothbardian, a tort-focused environment. The other side of this equation is that I know there's a very interesting discussion going on about train brake systems and how the trains that Norfolk Southern was using, particularly in this instance, had a more outdated mode rather than some of the more modern advancements in terms of train braking, both of which, so they were kind of skirting right into whatever the government said they had to do. I know there's part of the brouhaha is I think the Trump administration rescinded or stopped an Obama era rule dealing with train safety enforcement that would have required this sort of different braking system there. And so the problem is you have these companies that are doing up to the bare minimum of what the regulatory bodies themselves are saying and receive a level of protection because they are doing what the manager class has deemed the cost-effective way of handling this business. And again, so the downside here, facing these companies, the long-term liability for these, for the damage done by these decisions the company has made. And again, no matter how unforeseen a train derailment may be, again, it's the government that's actually protecting this sort of corporate behavior. And I can't think of a better illustration of that. Out of curiosity, I looked at the current stock price for Norfolk Southern Corporation. And currently, their stock price, while a bit down over where it was on before the accident. If you look at February 2nd, it was about $252 a share. Currently, it's hovering around $240. That is still higher than it was back in October of 2022 before a major disaster. And if that is not a demonstration of the market viewing that the damages from this incident are not going to be entirely borne by the company, I can't imagine what is. Again, if people are
so, and just to mention again, this brings in the implication that we've discussed before about government granting corporations corporate status. As I've mentioned in the past, when governments grant businesses corporate status, that protects the assets of those who have invested into it, and they will only lose what is lost in the market. They can't lose any more in a tortious claim. The corporation could lose some, but the investors won't. And so what this indicates is, it indicates that people aren't afraid that if they were to attach themselves to this corporation now, that they personally would be held liable. They'll only be held liable for what they invest. That's it, the baseline. And as we see the larger story about this systemically, about the institutions and the effects of the institutions of government and how they do this, I would bring this up. Just going to grab a quick drink of water here. If we're looking at this, probably have to take more water, but if we're looking at this in a way that we think about these arbitrary government standards and the businesses just going up to meeting the basic, the minimum of those standards, and then having protection if they meet the minimum of those standards, unless there is some recklessness that's determined in court or something like that, that's different. But they will bet, rather than increasing their insurance or anything like that, they will bet that if they meet those minimum standards, that will be fine. And people can argue about the government, oh, they didn't make this standard or that standard. Again, it's not the place for the government to determine what the standards should be, because they don't know what the standards should be. It hasn't been tested in any sort of a court system. It hasn't been tested by the people locally. It hasn't been tested by the insurance companies with real tests of what the liabilities would be. But what you end up seeing is when the government imposes these regulations, and unfortunately these tests in the market do come from accidents, and people learn from the accidents and then they adjust their behavior, and insurance companies adjust based on what happens in the long run after certain terrible things do happen. And that is just the way that life works. We all learn from other people's mistakes. We learn from our own. But when government gets involved, it does a couple terrible things. First, I liken it to when I mention to students when I'm talking about the inclined plane. Now, the inclined plane is a natural invention of people that they just learned, okay, if I push something up at this angle over this longer space, we can free up a guy, and this guy can now go do other work, and we're more efficient now. So we have a little bit of work making an inclined plane, carry it around, or we use some sand and we push something up. Same thing with the lever, all the basic machines, same thing, right? So you're decreasing work but increasing the number of units for the work. So it's just not as hard to do it. All right, now imagine instead of having, say, a lever or an inclined plane, you had one guy and he didn't have to invent the lever anymore. There was a third party, a force party, that came in and said, hey, person B over here, get over here and work with person A and help person A do all his work. Now that will inspire two things directly, as far as economics goes. That will inspire person A to start decreasing the amount of effort that he puts into his work. and relying on person B more and more. So just like these arbitrary government standards I do have to take more water. Just like these arbitrary government standards get in the way of people actually being more secure and determining, working harder to be safer. It's similar to having the first party being granted an easier time of it by the government forcing the second party to go in. So the first party doesn't have to do all the things that he normally would do himself. And then the other thing is, it's a disincentive to the first party inventing something, right? So if the first party had, let's say, originally had an inclined plane, and he could see the advantage of the inclined plane, and then the government said, okay, we're going to have this other party come over here and help you, and we're going to get rid of the inclined plane. That first person might say, well, that's kind of dumb because I can get a lot more done, and that other person can go do something else. But if you never had the inclined plane, never had any idea of it, and the government was just setting the standards right at the start, then lo and behold, what you're going to start seeing is you're going to start seeing that person A relying more and more on person B to get something done, not coming up with his own standards to improve his way of doing things. And of course, then you're going to see this unfortunate situation where you're not going to see as many great inventions as you possibly could. So this is the sort of thing that unfortunately is the basis of this entire government safety protocol standards. It's hiding, I should say, behind it as an outcome. And I think the guys here do a pretty good job spelling this out.
If that is, again, there's some very savvy calculations here on exactly what is the real the real risk here. And again, it's because the interventions within this economy, rather than the free market not caring about the real life consequences and again, the horrific humanitarian toll that an incident like this is really going to have on the community of East Palestine.
Well, it's very important to remember whenever you're talking about the railroads, and of course nowadays in America, most industries, and especially anything that deals with finance or heavy industry, it's heavily regulated already by usually the federal government for these large industries. In fact, railroads were the first really private industry brought under a regulatory umbrella by the federal government. And that was back, in the middle of the 19th century, just at the very early days of the American, the federal regulatory state.
Yep. Yeah. So, and of course, I mentioned some of that last night, going into some of the history of the rails. Now, I know we're up against the clock, so I do want to get to some reading for y'all, and hopefully my need to drink the water to get the green beans out of my teeth was okay. But yeah, good stuff from Ryan McMakin. I think Ryan, of course, you can see there is the senior editor of the Mises Institute, and Jeffrey Tucker used to be there. In 2004, Jeffrey was the one who edited my piece there on ABC's Nightline, and he and I went back and forth on some ideas and stuff. So that was a lot of fun. And Tho Bishop also, really appreciate what Tho does. And so you can find them. It's Mises Media, 145,000 subscribers. Awesome. Very, very cool. So check that out if you get the opportunity. And I want to turn now to a really good book. This is Myths of the Robber Barons by Burton J. Folsom. And in it, you'll see and he's done remarkable work in all sorts of other areas as well. He has one on the Industrial Revolution that sort of incorporates some of this information. But here, we're looking at America, in particular, the United States. In his other book about the Industrial Revolution, he goes into Europe and England in particular, but he adds United States stuff as well. But I thought this would be pretty good to add to this. The first chapter is very, very interesting, and it's all about steamboats going up and down the Hudson River and the growth of the Vanderbilt industry, and how Vanderbilt was blamed and accused, I should say, of being a robber baron. Oh, he's doing terrible things, and he's undercutting people and so on. And it has a lot to do with the mentality that led to the Sherman Antitrust Act and things like that in the late 1800s. But here I want to read to you about James J. Hill and the transcontinental railroads. This is a picture of James J. Hill when he was 25 years old. And so here it is. Chapter 2 from Burton Folsom's book, The Myth of the Robber Barons. The story of the building of the transcontinental railroads makes for good reading. It has a sound plot. 4 railroads get charters and subsidies to build across the country. It has suspense. The Union Pacific and Central Pacific frantically race across plains and over mountains to complete the railroad. It has an all-star cast. U.S. presidents, army generals, and political adventurers confront Indians on the warpath, politicians on the take, and thousands of Chinese and Irish workers. The story tells of the agony of defeat, Indian raids and winter storms, and the thrill of victory with the meeting of the Union and Pacific in Utah in the final hammering of the golden spike. Finally, there is celebrating as the story ends. Western Union telegraphs the event across the nation, and revelers sound the Liberty Bell from Independence Hall. Over the years, historians have told this story and described the drama, but they have often criticized the main actors and their exploits. The grab for federal subsidies seems to have led to greed and corruption, but, and this is the key point, most historians say there was no way to get the happy ending to the transcontinental story without federal aid. Unless the government had been willing to build the transcontinental lines itself, John Garrity typically asserts, some system of subsidy was essential. But there's a nagging problem in this argument. While some of this rush for subsidies was still going on, James J. Hill was building a transcontinental from St. Paul to Seattle with no federal aid whatsoever. Also, Hill's Road was the best built, the least corrupt, the most popular, and the only transcontinental never to go bankrupt. It took longer to build than the others, but Hill used this time to get the shortest route on the best grade with the least curvature. In doing so, he attracted settlement and trade by cutting costs for passengers and freight. Could it be that in the long run, the subsidies may have corrupted railroad development and hindered economic growth? The transcontinental story is worth a more careful look. It may have a different ending if we move Hill from the cameo role to that of a leading actor. The dream of a transcontinental had excited promoters and patriots ever since the Mexican War and the acquisition of California, illegal acquisition. Congress spent $150,000 during the 1850s surveying 3 possible routes from the Mississippi River to the West Coast. In 1862, with the Southern Democrats out of the Union, Congress hastily passed the Pacific Railroad Act. This act led to the creation of the Union Pacific, which would lay rails west from Omaha, and the Central Pacific, which would start in Sacramento and build east. Since congressmen wanted the road built quickly, they did 2 key things. First, they gave each line 20 alternate sections of land for each mile of track completed. Just gave them the land. Second, they gave loans, $16,000 for each mile of track of flat prairie land, $32,000 per mile of hilly terrain, and $48,000 per mile in the mountains. The Union Pacific and Central Pacific then would compete for government largesse. The line that built the most miles would get the most cash and land. The land, of course, would be sold, and this way the railroad would be financed. In this arrangement, the incentive was for speed, not efficiency. The 2 lines spent little time choosing routes. They just laid track and cashed in. The subsidies shaped the Union Pacific builders' strategy in the following ways. They moved west from Omaha in 1865 along the Platte River. Since they were being paid by the mile, they sometimes built winding, circuitous roads to collect for more mileage. For construction, they used cheap and light wrought iron rails, soon to be outmoded by Bessemer rails. And Thomas Durant, vice president and general manager, stressed speed, not workmanship. Quote, "You were doing too much masonry this year," Durant told a staff member. Quote, "Substitute stressed and wooden culverts for masonry whenever you can for the present." End quote. Also, since trees were scarce on the plains, Durant and his chief engineer, Grenville Dodge, were hard pressed to make railroad ties, 2,003 of which were needed to finish each mile of track. Sometimes they shipped in wood, other times they used the fragile cottonwood found in the Platte River Valley. Often they artfully solved their problem by passing it on to others. The Union Pacific simply paid top wages to tie cutters and daily bonuses for ties received. Hordes of tie cutters, therefore, invaded Nebraska, cut trees wherever they found, and delivered freshly cut ties right to the UP line. The UP leaders conveniently argued that since most of Nebraska was unsurveyed, farmers in the way were therefore squatters and held no right to any trees on this so-called public land. Some farmers used rifles to defend their land, and in the wake of violence, even Durant discovered, quote, that it was not good policy to take all their timber, end quote. Policy, aggression. The rush for subsidies caused other building problems too. Nebraska winters were long and hard, but since Dodge was in a hurry, he laid track on the ice and snow anyway. Naturally, the line had to be rebuilt in the spring. What was worse, unanticipated spring flooding along the Loop Fork of the Platte River washed out rails, bridges, and telephone poles, doing at least $50,000 damage the first year. No wonder some observers estimated the actual building cost at almost 3 times what it should have been. By pushing rail lines through unsettled land, the transcontinentals invited Indian attacks, which caused the loss of hundreds of lives and further ran up the cost of building. The Cheyenne and Sioux harassed the road throughout Nebraska and Wyoming. They took horses, damaged track, and scalped workmen along the way. The government paid the costs of sending extra troops along the line to help protect it. But when they left, the graders, tie setters, track layers, and bolters often had to work in teams, with half of them standing guard and the other half working. In some cases, such as the Plum Creek Massacre in Nebraska, the Union Pacific attorney admitted his line was negligent. It had sent working men into areas known to be frequented by hostile Indians. As the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific entered Utah in 1869, the competition became fiercer and more costly. Both sides graded lines that paralleled each other, and both claimed subsidies for this mileage. As they approached each other, the workers on the Union Pacific, mostly Irish, assaulted those on the Central Pacific, mostly Chinese. In a series of attacks and counterattacks with boulders and gunpowder, many lives were lost and much track was destroyed. Both sides involved Presidents Johnson and Grant in the feuding. With the threat of a federal investigation looming, the two lines finally compromised at Promontory Point, Utah, at their meeting place. They joined tracks on May 10th with hoopla, speeches, and the veneer of unity. After the celebration, however, most of the shoddy construction lines had to be rebuilt and sometimes relocated, a task that the Union Pacific didn't finish until 5 years later. As Dodge said one week before the historic meeting, quote, "I never saw so much needless waste in building railroads. Our own construction department has been inefficient." Now, I'm going to stop there. I'll continue with this tomorrow and go through some of this very interesting stuff about the positive side of the private industry, and there's a lot here, of Mr. Hill and his rail line. And of course, James J. Hill later was said to have been one of the evil robber barons when he did it himself and he didn't take other people's money and take their land. Thank you so much for joining me, everybody. I really hope that I've given you a good show here. Want to check out what's happening. Hey, thanks. I'm glad we have all those people watching in the Rockfin chat. And again, if you're watching on Twitter, we came in a couple minutes late, so it was probably off time. But please join us in the Rockfin chat. I want to find out what some of the people in the Rockfin chat have been saying and see what's happening, as they say in the old rock and roll world. All right, let's see. Occult Priestess. Very cool. She's there. I see Denver Attaway is mentioning in a conversation with Occult Priestess talking about Ukrainian commanders, ISIS badges. Here we go. Former Khan member. I prefer the cannibalism in Northwest Passage, starring Spencer Tracy as the colonial military leader Robert Rogers, 1731 to 1795, whose rangers had burned the Abenaki settlement of Odanak in 1759. Wow, I have to see that. I've never seen that movie. I wonder, let me know, former Khan, do you think that that is historically accurate? It'd be interesting to check that out. And I'm going backwards here, guys, so I apologize. Movie Ravenous. Oh, yeah, they're talking about Ravenous. A grim, yeah. Yeah, that looks Occult Priestess. Government offers happy ending to train industry. Well said. Yeah, yeah, so true. Oh, Jason. Oh, guard is still on. I paused on my end and I thought it was over. It paused on my end. Yeah. So, Jason, I hope that didn't happen to everybody. Let me know. Um, yeah, always a little bit difficult, but I gotta, build the resources slowly but surely. Putting the money away as best I can. In a Big Country, song by Big Country. Cheer up, everyone. Yeah, Big Country, good band. They were really good. Their first two albums were really good. I believe the lead singer of Big Country committed suicide about 3 or 4 years ago. Very sad. The drummer for Big Country played on the Cults. Technically, it's the Cults' first album, but it's the first album as the Cult. That has Big Neon Glitter and Here Comes the Rain and stuff like that. She Sells Sanctuary is on it. The Phoenix, and the guitar riff on the Phoenix is intentionally it's a play on I Want to Be Your Dog by the Stooges. That wow 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 is the only thing I can play on guitar. And the Phoenix is just an epic song. It's great. But the drummer from Big Country plays on that album. They were Southern Death Cult before they became the Cult, and they put out stuff as the name Southern Death Cult. Oh, hey, Occult Priestess, I like this. Listening to Guard over the past 30 minutes makes me feel justified in being an anarchist. I cannot wait to chat with you next week. Let's see if we can hook up if you're free, Occult Priestess. I would really appreciate it. It'd be really really cool. So yeah, She Sells Sanctuary. Yeah, she's pointing at herself. Very cool. Another great show, Guard. Hope you're feeling chipper tonight. Assyria Go, yes, and thank you so much. It was again, not to get too involved. I'm on this end of the camera, and we could have conversations just hanging out, in some tavern somewhere in Utah or something. But yeah, each morning when I wake up, I'm never really sure. I'm always super stuffy, and during the night I get up and I take some quercetin or something else that will help to clear my sinuses, which allows me to get horizontal again. If I get horizontal, and I don't know why it's like this, it's just weird. I love sleeping, but it's been like this recently, and I get horizontal, my head gets all stuffed up, and there's always that chance that the headache is going to start up, and it's a crazy thing. And then you get super tired. I don't know whether it's because of this accident I had when I was 18. This lady ran a red light and smashed into me when I was going to the dump in my parents' car. I was taking the trash to the dump. I never had headaches and stuff like this, but things change. But I think it's environmental. I think it's mold exposure. So yeah, so I just got to try to get out of the environment and stuff like that. Try to clean it as best as I can while I'm here. And yeah, it's tough. It's really tricky stuff. So anyway, yeah. One of the things though that was interesting is about a year and a half ago, I was getting X-rays to check to see if it was spinal or anything like that, and I got to have a new X-ray, which is really cool. You move during the X-ray. They actually had me moving my neck up and down. It was wild. And they showed me the video afterwards. They showed me on the screen. I was like, wow. I'm like Arnold Schwarzenegger in Total Recall. It's pretty wild. Zinc, yeah, zinc is good. Zinc is good for lungs. Yeah, I take extra zinc. I take extra vitamin D, extra vitamin C, extra potassium and magnesium, quercetin, bromelain, neem, which is very good, very popular in India. And so yes, it has seen a little bit of improvement, which is good, but I'm still not up to the way that I want to be, which is I'm pretty intense most of the time. Just I just don't. I'm always like energetic. It's pretty wild. Anyway, it's fun, being that way. I guess I don't know. I don't know any difference. So I hope you get to move to a safer area soon. Absolutely. Yeah, zinc is good for the lungs. Yes, sir. Big time, you guys. So look, I better get going. Thank you so much, everybody. I didn't even take these glasses things off, and I know that like I had to put them back together again a little while ago, so I don't know whether they're like even on my head. So we'll see. I don't know. Oh, I think I just broke them. So look, I better get going. And thank you so much for joining me, one and all. We'll see you again tomorrow night. And tomorrow night, I was in touch with the awesome one, none other than Eric Peters. Eric Peters is going to join me tomorrow night to talk about some very key stuff on transportation that he has. He's always writing great new pieces. So I can't wait to talk to Eric Peters tomorrow night at 6:30, and we'll be doing our fiction at 6:30. Can't wait. And then next week, I'm going to try to open things up, and let's start getting a group of people doing the short story readings, and we'll have everybody in the windows, and that'll be really, really fun. So in the meantime, I'm going to clear out. I'll say thank you again. And don't forget, please visit my Substack for that new isolated video. You can go to Bitchute as well, the Liberty Conspiracy video on that Microsoft ad thing. And I have all of those examples from yesterday's show that I pulled out, made a separate video, and all of them are isolated now in that video, and they're exposed as examples of government colluding with big tech, left-wing corporate interests, and NGOs trying to stifle free speech about things like jab realities, COVID-19 realities, even climate change stuff, all those things. It's all in there, and I hope you'll check out those videos. And please, if you haven't signed up over at Substack, please do. Love to have you along for the ride. And I put out an extra thing today, which was, how on Sundays we do this Sunday news assembly. This is the Friday Junior News Assembly. It's the Friday Junior News because it's Thursday, and Grace Curley, who's a really fun radio host, she calls it Friday Junior. So I put out 10 stories today that you might find interesting. So in the meantime, I hope you find this interesting. I dig this.